that the folks in the room at the Fed were cussing, saying this is the dumbest idea they've ever heard. There's nothing strategic about Bitcoin, and almost kicked us out of the room. Because they thought this was such a bad idea, and how dare we even breathe this idea, in the building of the Federal Reserve. So this will not be without controversy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Coin Stories podcast. Joining me today is Perianne Boring, founder and CEO of the Digital Chamber. And we have a lot to talk about because the regulatory winds are shifting in our favor. So Perianne, first of all, how are you doing? Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's so good to be here. Awesome. I mean, I don't know if we could be better positioned. So we're really excited going into 2025, and we have a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, you have your finger on the pulse of everything happening in DC and with the policymakers. So tell me how the red wave has really changed things. I mean, it seems like everyone's now bullish on Bitcoin, including the highest office in America.
I wouldn't say everyone.
Okay.
I wouldn't say everyone, but I will say that we did successfully defeat the anti-crypto army. It's defeated, but it's not totally dead.
Okay.
There's still a lot of patriots out there still working against our movement. So it's not totally dead. I don't think everything is going to be smooth sailing, but we've been waiting for many years to have this political alignment. So I think the big summary of kind of what was accomplished at the polls is that, well, one, we obviously have our first pro-crypto president, which is massive. But it's not just that. We also have a pro-crypto Congress. So there's over 290 members of Congress that will be sworn in come January that ran and are on record being pro-crypto. And I was on the ground day one working on public policy for Bitcoin. And I worked to recruit the very first Bitcoin champion in U.S. Congress in 2014. So we went from 1 to 290 in a decade. And that's it's hard to explain just how big of a deal that is to have that kind of support at the highest level of government.
We had Digital Chamber just celebrated 10 years. So can you tell me just what your reaction is to this sweeping change? Did you expect it to maybe, a lot of people feel like this is actually fast, but you've been working on it. So do you feel like, oh, it's finally time?
It's funny. It's kind of nostalgic being back in New York this week, because I actually called defeat, and that we had made it back in 2016 when Bitcoin hit 20K for the first time. So I'll never forget that moment. I think everyone had that kind of mental moment when Bitcoin crossed 100K of we've made it.
Yeah.
But I felt that when we hit 20K, but we were all in town for the Consensus Conference back when it used to be held here in New York. We were all celebrating 20K, and we all woke up, and we're all going to work to go to the conference. And I'm like, do we retire? Do we even go to work this week? I'm pretty sure we should just go get champagne and party in the streets, because we have arrived. So we've accomplished a lot, but actually I think it's Bitcoin has been stifled by governments for many, many years. Our models were showing us that Bitcoin would have hit 100K over 4 years ago during the last halving cycle. So this progress has been slowed down and stifled. It's very exciting to finally be here, but it's taken actually a lot longer than I think it could have had you not had all these actions from the regulators and the policymakers trying to slow this down.
Well, let's specifically zoom in on the SEC. We're going to get a new SEC chair. Gary Gensler's going to resign. What do you expect?
Well, we're very excited to see Paul Atkins named as the next SEC chairman. Of course, he needs to be formally nominated, which won't happen until Trump takes office. January 20th, and then he has to be confirmed by the Senate. But knowing Paul, I've worked very closely with him since 2017.
Oh, okay, you have. Okay.
He's one of our advisory board members, and he was one of the people that I brought in to start the Token Alliance. That's a group that we operate at the Digital Chamber. It's like a working group. It's our largest and most active group at the Digital Chamber. But we started that in 2017, and Paul was one of our he's our co-chair. So he's former SEC commissioner. That's why we brought him in. And then I also asked Jim Newsom, who's a former our CFTC chairman to be the co-chair. So the two of them, we brought them together because, of course, these issues are all about the digital asset markets, and that jurisdiction is SEC versus CFTC, although it shouldn't be versus, it's SEC and CFTC. So we have really worked very, very closely with him for a number of years to address some of the most pressing issues for Bitcoin and the larger digital asset landscape. I believe we will see, the regulatory clarity that the industry needs. And spending a lot of time with Paul, his position has always been the SEC has the statutory authority to provide that clarity that the crypto markets need. So I would expect we would see that sooner rather than later. But we absolutely have an amazing champion who's set up, and he's, very well politically connected. So I don't see any reasons with any issues or reasons why confirmation would be stalled or issues around that.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. Yeah, I read that he was the first libertarian SEC commissioner. And when he spoke in an interview I heard on, I believe it was Fox Business, he talked about the freedom component of this technology. So can you maybe get specific on when people say regulatory clarity, what does that mean? Are we going to have an SEC chair that defines what is a security versus a commodity versus a stablecoin? Are we going to get that type of framework?
Well, I think the issue really came back, and you have to go back through crypto history. So all these questions really started to emerge during the ICO boom, which really started in 2016. You went, a little after Ethereum was invented and released, people started figuring out how to launch their own tokens, and you did all these initial coin offerings. And some of the stuff we were seeing was exciting. Some of it was a little scary. Some of it was not good at all. But clearly there needed to be a regulatory framework to ensure that this is done in a safe way that respects the law, protects investors, and is, commensurate with the values that we all hold as part of the Bitcoin community. So the challenge really came down to token issuances. So Bitcoin has, a unique feature in that it, had this immaculate conception. There's no issuer. Right. There's not an issuer. So, but there was, Satoshi was a real person or group of people, and they did create this, and they released it to the world for free. But when they did that back in 2008, 2009 timeframe, nobody was watching, nobody was paying attention because it was such early days. They created something brand new. Now everybody's watching. So you can't really release a token today because everybody's watching without somebody, noticing. So Bitcoin got the benefit of those many years of being able to gain traction before the regulatory community was really paying attention. So the question around regulatory clarity is, what is the rules for issuance? How can you bring a new cryptocurrency? And of course, there are cryptocurrencies that should be regulated as securities. We call them intentional digital asset securities because their creators are looking to issue them in a regulated framework. But there's also digital assets that are not securities. They're commodities. We also have digital assets that are not financial products at all, like NFTs. They're just consumer products. They're like digital collectibles. And then we have stable coins that are really meant to operate more as currency or for payments. So that regulatory clarity is which regulatory agencies have jurisdiction of which cryptocurrencies. So since all of these issues started, which has been many years now, the problem is we don't have anything in statute, in law, that says this is how you know if a cryptocurrency is within each regulatory agency, the SEC or the CFTC or neither or somewhere else, because those rules haven't been written. So we went to the SEC back in 2017 and asked them to define when is a digital asset a security, and they refused to do that. And
what was their reasoning? Just that 1933 securities laws is enough?
I think there was, looking back, it was a big lack of leadership. We did not have a good leader at the SEC that was willing to take this on. And I think a reason why was because from what I hear and I understand is that the Treasury Department had encouraged them not to. They didn't really want this technology to grow. They didn't want this industry we didn't want to foster innovation or development. So providing this regulatory clarity would have helped grow the industry and therefore not what they wanted to see done.
Right.
So that regulatory clarity, just knowing when is a digital asset a security or when is it a commodity, having that in statute would address a lot of the issues the digital asset industry faces. But that's not it. I mean, just over the past couple of months, one of the big topics we saw was around the custody issues and the Staff Accounting Bulletin 121, which gained so much traction. Of course, we worked on a bill. We did get that passed through both the House and Senate, and then unfortunately, President Joe Biden vetoed it at the last minute.
And it was bipartisan. It's almost there.
I mean, it's as a former congressional staffer, only 2% of legislation that ever gets introduced actually becomes law. Like that is kind of the holy grail of people working in policy advocacy is getting that done. So it was, I mean, just getting something through both chambers with bipartisan support is a massive, massive feat. So, I mean, we were really disappointed, obviously, for the president to veto that. But one thing that I think we can expect to see day -1 of Paul Atkins' tenure there when he starts as chairman is I think that will be rescinded. So the SEC they could internally vote to rescind it. What I believe we will probably see after Gary Gensler resigns is we'll likely see Commissioner Hester Peirce, crypto mom, appointed as the acting chair. I believe she will be the one that will be acting because she's the most senior. She's had the longest tenure there. So it's kind of right that she would be the one that would be appointed to acting chair. So that's an exciting thing to think crypto mom will be the acting chair of the SEC while we're waiting for Mr. Atkins to get confirmed by the Senate. And she could bring that forward to be rescinded. And I think she wants to. We'll see very, very soon. But that could get done even before Paul Atkins takes power. And that could really help address the challenges of institutions. Right. Providing institutional level support for Bitcoin, which really takes us to the next level of adoption.
Right, completely. I had the chance to have Hester on the show, and she's such a big advocate for this whole space. I want to talk about the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve or stockpile.
Yeah.
I feel pretty bullish, and I think everyone watching is expecting for the 200,000 Bitcoin that the government already has through civil forfeiture to hold it, right? We're going to hodl that. But the idea of purchasing 1 million Bitcoin, like the Bitcoin Act suggests, the questions of are we going to sell gold or reprice gold? Can you speak to that? I mean, what are you seeing and what do you think is actually going to happen?
So we started this conversation with saying not everyone's on our side. So very optimistic. We do have that political alignment now, but that doesn't mean everyone's on our team. And if you just look at the mainstream media, you'll quickly see there's a lot of FUD being perpetuated. And every time you see Bitcoin starting to gain traction and our community is going in the right direction, there's always some other force just trying to knock us back and knock us back. So it's been this long-term battle. So this Bitcoin strategic stockpiler reserve, there's a nuance there. Yeah. But essentially the U.S. government holding Bitcoin, potentially buying more as well, is something that could position the United States and protect our financial dominance for the next generation. This is something I'm passionate about as someone who's my background's in monetary policy. So this is really, I think our best chance of saving America's future and preserving that future on the global stage is to add Bitcoin as a reserve. But not everyone agrees with that. Just on the way over, I was watching an interview on MSNBC where they were just tearing this apart. Just last week, I was in Washington, D.C., meeting with members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. And when I brought this up, I'd never seen a reaction like quite the one I saw at that boardroom table. But the folks in the room at the Fed were cussing, saying this is the dumbest idea they've ever heard. There's nothing strategic about Bitcoin, and almost kicked us out of the room because they thought this was such a bad idea. And how dare we even breathe this idea, in the building of the Federal Reserve. So this will not be without controversy. This will not be without pushback. But when you mentioned freedom, at its heart, Bitcoin is an open source technology. And that's why I've spent 10 years dedicating my life and my career to fighting to bring this technology to the people of the world. open source technology in the United States is protected by free speech. You're a journalist and you have dedicated your career to advocating for that sacred, First Amendment right for all American people.
Right.
We are a branch of that same tree.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is, because this is open source software. This is another mechanism to exercise those First Amendment rights. And for the US government to hold this asset as a strategic reserve not only will position us as the dominant financial player on the global system for the next, for the digital revolution that's underway, but it also helps advance the First Amendment. And there's a reason why it is the First Amendment. So this is one way to bring this technology to all people and to bring these American values to places and communities that really didn't have this kind of hope before Bitcoin.
This episode is brought to you by Casa. As some of you know, I recently updated my self-custody, and Casa makes self-custody so easy even if you've never held your own keys or used multisig before. Casa has a state-of-the-art app and live experts standing by to guide you every step of the way. For those with large Bitcoin holdings, Casa just rolled out a new service. It now offers a holistic security advisory service. As a private client, you'll get a 7-step security overhaul, personalized consulting, and your own private emergency line for expert help when you need it most. Get 10% off your Casa plan at casa.io/Natalie. Next up, Speed, the fastest growing Lightning wallet in the world. Send and receive Bitcoin, swap with stable coins, and even snag gift cards to earn rewards, all in seconds. Download Speed via the QR code or the link in my show notes and use code CoinStories10 for 5,000 free sats. And finally, are you ready to take control of your wealth? The Bitcoin Way is here to empower you. Learn how to take full self-custody and eliminate all counterparty risk. Set up a node and become the master of your own transactions and enjoy true autonomy. And upgrade your cybersecurity and protect your online privacy like I did. The Bitcoin Way specializes in personalized one-on-one training to help you become fully self-sovereign. Schedule a free consultation today. All right, back to the show. Well, President-elect Trump leans into controversy. So could we see him really advocating for this? He's talked about it. He says that we might pay off our debt with a crypto credit card. He says never sell your Bitcoin. Eric Trump was just at the Bitcoin conference giving a very bullish speech about how he sees Bitcoin going to $1 million and potentially no capital gains tax, which would be amazing, but I don't know if I believe that. But I mean, could we see him take action by executive order or using his influence to have the Bitcoin Act actually pass?
So there's a couple different ways to achieve. So breaking this down. So what candidate Trump, because at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, this is when he issued this proposal or made this campaign promise to our community. He promised to create a strategic Bitcoin stockpile. And then after his talk, then Senator Lummis then came out and introduced the Bitcoin Act, which creates a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So the stockpile is just take that 208,000 Bitcoin and hodl it for forever.
Transfer it to the Treasury, right?
Move it onto the U.S. Treasury's balance sheet. So it's at either the Marshal Service or within the Department of Justice. So that needs to be moved and then put into a place where it can't be sold or moved around for other purposes. So out of law enforcement's hands into the Treasury. Where Senator Lummis said, okay, let's do that. But then I'm going to take it a step further and say, let's purchase 1 million Bitcoin on top of that. And then if you remember, Robert Kennedy took it even like 3 more steps further. And he said, I'm going to up you to 4 million.
Yeah.
So it gets very, very bullish very, very quickly.
Sure.
But nonetheless, there are significant executive authorities that the President of the United States has. So being able to take the existing Bitcoin that the U.S. government owns, put in a separate reserve under the U.S. Treasury should be pretty straightforward just through executive powers, through an executive order. That buying additional Bitcoin, whether it's 1 million or 4 million or however much, typically you do need an act of Congress to do any additional spending. But again, the president has pretty broad authorities, and there are all sorts of funds within the U.S. government, in the
Right.
U.S. Treasury, where those funds could be allocated to something like this. And they have pretty broad, it gives the president pretty broad, mandate to spend those types of funds on, things that fit within their, their authority. So I think if there's a will, there's a way.
Mhm.
And President or I guess candidate Trump, now President-elect Trump, did promise this to our community. So, and I don't think anything is stopping him.
So if you had to guess, a year from now, has the United States purchased Bitcoin?
I don't know. I mean, I don't necessarily want to speculate on a specific timeline, but I do believe the authorities are there, and if there's a will, there's a way. So this really starts with leadership. That's really been the big challenge our space has always faced in Washington is you need that leader. You need someone at the highest levels that is willing to execute on a bold mission. And that's what we've really been missing for so long. But I think we now have that puzzle piece. So, I do think we are going to look back a year from now, and this space is going to look very different than what it looks like today, despite the fact of how exciting it is in this moment.
Well, when you talk about the idea of the Board of Governors meeting and being so anti-Bitcoin, do you think it's just a knowledge and education gap? They just don't understand it. They haven't taken the time to study it? Or is there some other agenda behind it because they're working and they're getting paid by the institution that maybe feels threatened by Bitcoin?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think for one, the Federal Reserve is, has a monopoly on money today, and it's in the Fed's individual interest to protect that monopoly. Although I actually think Bitcoin can preserve that by adding Bitcoin to the U.S. balance sheet, or backing the U.S. dollar with Bitcoin, or issuing bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds that are backed by Bitcoin. I think that strengthens the U.S. dollar.
Okay, I wanted to talk to you about this because I feel like there's an active debate in the space. It's going to rage on for the next year and longer. I'm seeing my audience even bifurcate. Some people are really worried about the idea of a Bitcoin dollar and the concerns that we're just going to extend our debt Ponzi somehow, and that the government's going to try to control Bitcoin in some way. They're going to push down the ability for people to self-custody, encourage everyone to be on these wallets, which ultimately would be under the purview of the government. They could confiscate, they could freeze your accounts if they wanted, versus others say, hey, this is just Bitcoin assimilating into the traditional financial system. This is a great thing. It would be great for the dollar dominance to extend. Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple really important things to take note here. And just going back to what I was saying earlier, that what this is about is freedom. It's about freedom of speech. It's about the freedom to transact. It's about having digital property rights in the digital economy. That's the policy goal that we need to achieve. It's not about making money. It's not about dollar go up. It's not about speculative trading. All of that's ancillary. The goal is, this is a tool to exercise our most sacred human rights around the world. And this technology should be made available to the people of the world. In the United States, absolutely, as the center of the democratic world, should be at the forefront of doing so. So that's where we start. In terms of, the government getting behind it and concerns about privacy, these are all very valid concerns. I think one piece of policy that has to be a part of the conversation is tax policy. In 2014, the IRS came out and declared that Bitcoin, or convertible virtual currencies, at the time it was basically just Bitcoin, but they're talking about cryptocurrencies, would be taxed as property, subjecting them to capital gains and capital losses. I don't believe the IRS had the statutory authority to do this. This was not approved by Congress, particularly now that the Chevron deference has been struck down. I think it's very possible that guidance can be reversed, because they did not have the authority to just come out and declare cryptocurrencies as property.
Wow.
You mentioned Eric Trump he gave a great speech. I just watched it this morning. Very bullish. He's obviously a true believer, understands the technology, which is great to have the president-elect's son to be, an actual true understander of what this is all
Mhm.
about. And, he talked about how the family had been persecuted and debanked and all these other things. And it's like,
Oh yeah,
we're all a
the use
part of
case
that.
right there.
We're all a part of that same family. We've experienced those same, discriminatory practices, on this community that the Trump family faced as well. But he talked about if you read his slides that he had up on the screen, one of them was making Bitcoin tax-free.
Mhm.
I don't like the way he phrased it. I would not encourage anyone to say, oh, we're trying to make Bitcoin tax-free, because then that just sounds like, oh, we're trying to get out of paying our taxes. That's not what it's about. It's not about not paying your taxes. Bitcoiners pay a lot of taxes.
Yeah.
I think 25% of all capital gains within the past couple of years all came from cryptocurrency
Oh wow.
holders. So like, this is a community that's
Mhm.
absolutely paying their taxes. That's not what it's about. But having digital assets, particularly Bitcoin, taxed as property, for one, it makes it very difficult to use in payments.
Mhm.
So when we often talk about Bitcoin, we call it a store of value or digital gold, but Satoshi Nakamoto called it a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So why don't we use it like cash, as Satoshi intended? The reason is because of tax policy. So because of those, the way that it's taxed and tax policy, it's always used to influence human behavior. The Treasury, kind of took Bitcoin from being able to be used as a medium exchange and really pushed it into this little box of, okay, well, you can't have all of these things, but I guess, you can, operate as a store of value or like digital gold. So I think in a free country, in a free society, people should be able to use whatever they want
Mhm.
to exchange their goods and services, whether that's seashells or wampum or tobacco or
Yeah.
shiny rocks like gold or silver or some government issued piece of paper. We should be able to use what we want.
Right.
But because of tax policy, that prevents it. But also because of the way it's taxed, you have to report this
Yeah.
to the US government. And of course, every Bitcoin transaction is logged on a public ledger. So this is a privacy issue. So if you're required to report your crypto or your Bitcoin holdings to the IRS and they can see your wallet, they can then see everything you do.
Yeah.
In addition to our freedom of speech, we have a right to privacy. And this violates that right in the digital world. So tax policy is really important as we're talking about these big things like creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve, or how do we extend dollar dominance by using this strategic asset to create and protect the value of the dollar for the next generation. We can't leave out tax policy.
Right.
It's just as important because of that right to privacy.
Right.
And this is where that is infringed on.
Well, I've definitely heard of proposals that would make a certain threshold untaxable,
A de
essentially.
minimis.
Yes. Cynthia Lummis, I think, was asking for what that amount should be at one of the conferences I went to. She was looking for feedback. Some countries have, I think, $10,000, after which it is subject to the capital gains. So I'm curious if we'll end up getting that. But doesn't it sort of contradict? Like, if we use it as a medium of exchange, wouldn't it then threaten the dollar? But you say that Bitcoin could actually extend dollar dominance. So how does that work?
I think a de minimis was always a compromise. There's been several pieces of legislation over many years. You're trying to get a de minimis exemption for Bitcoin, because again, it really comes back to that fundamental, that right to privacy.
Mm-hmm.
We should not be required to give all of this transaction data over to the US government. And even if there is a de minimis provision, you still have to track all that, because you have to make sure you're below the de minimis. So we didn't achieve we didn't achieve that goal. But I don't think in any way, shape, or form Bitcoin does compete with the US dollar. I don't think that's a helpful conversation or argument to put forward. We've seen Bitcoin and fiat currencies coexist for 15 years now. Sure. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I'm a free market maximalist. I know we have a lot of Bitcoin maxis that are probably listening to this. But what the core, one of the core things of the Bitcoin ethos is free market capitalism. Right. People should be able to choose
to decide,
which means you have to have options.
Okay.
So you can have a government sponsored medium of exchange that you pay your taxes in, that you do all sorts of things in. But that doesn't mean that there should be a monopoly on that.
Right. Okay, I totally get your vision. Before we start to wrap up, I do want to ask you about God Bless Bitcoin because we had the chance to be part of this project together. You're one of the leaders with Brian and Kelly Estes behind the scenes. So just tell me a little bit about that because I feel like right now as the bull market gets going, 100K, a lot of people are now paying attention to Bitcoin. And I think that that is one of the best orange pill introductory, like, here's what Bitcoin is all about and the problem it fixes.
Well, I'll tell you why I was so excited to join as one of the executive producers of God Bless Bitcoin. And my work, working in public policy and advocacy, one of the challenges we've always had is just education. People don't understand it. And so many people's first impression of Bitcoin came through something bad. What they heard on MSNBC maybe yesterday, or maybe they were a victim of ransomware. My uncle's business was a ransomware victim. And that's how he first heard about Bitcoin. He's like, Bitcoin, what are you doing with Bitcoin? Like, not a great introduction. So despite kind of that, most people's first interaction today, might be that it was something negative. And it's really hard to turn first impressions around. And we really didn't have a great resource that made the moral case for Bitcoin. It is my personal view that Bitcoin is the most moral and ethical form of money that's available to humanity today. But who's to say what is moral or what is ethical? So we look to scriptures because in so many communities around the world, it's typically religion, whatever their religion is, that kind of sets the boundaries of what is right and what is wrong. So God Bless Bitcoin is not promoting any specific religion. We studied all the world's major religions over a 2-year time period. We talked to scholars and experts who had studied these sacred texts and what they said about money. And then we took that and we juxtapose what do scriptures of different religions say about money and juxtapose that to Bitcoin to show that this is a moral form of money. And then we also juxtapose that to fiat money, which didn't quite meet the same standard.
Right. It has theft baked into the cake right at the bottom. Well, no, it's an incredible film. I hope everyone checks it out. It's available for free at godblessbitcoin.com. Anything else you want to share, you want to leave people with to maybe think about or what you're working on?
Well, I think we were talking about tax policy. I think that's something important to pay attention to and continue to advocate for and push for as we're talking about these big things. But the other thing is that individual ownership and that removing that, changing the tax classification. It also encourages individuals to hold in custody their digital assets. I see this as a sacred right as we're all moving into the digital economy. Bitcoin is a digital bearer instrument. It was the first digital bearer instrument ever invented and made available to people today. So being able to own and control your own asset, there's something very American about that. So I also, not your keys, not your coins. We don't want to lose that as well as we're moving into mainstream adoption.
No, absolutely. And I highly recommend everyone check out our first interview because you went into your whole backstory. We have similar backgrounds in that we were both greatly impacted by the great financial crisis. You went off and studied economics. I wish I had. Eventually, you made your way into news. But I just admire the fact that you were so early in this, and a lot of people don't give you enough credit. You've been pounding the pavement in the most important place to do it, in Washington, D.C., about this for more than a decade. And I thank you so much for all the work that you've done. It's so amazing. And you're so much earlier. I wish I knew Bitcoin. I wish I knew about it when you did. But thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here. Good to see you, Natalie.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. Make sure you're subscribed to the show and hit that notifications button so you never miss any new content. Also, check out our weekly free newsletter at thenewsblock.substack.com. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing should constitute as investment advice, and you should always do your own research. I'm always open to feedback and guest suggestions, so please feel free to reach out at info@talkingbitcoin.com. I'll see you next time.